Your passion for living?
How dare you? You aren't fit to wipe his boots.
Clark Gable may have been the king of Hollywood on screen, but off camera, he lived a royally scandalous life that studios desperately tried to hide. From illicit affairs to deadly rumors, Gable's private exploits were as dramatic as any movie plot. And today we're uncovering the three biggest scandals that nearly toppled his throne. 1. The secret love child with Loretta Young. Clark Gable's first scandal was a real-life drama that the studios kept secret for over 60 years. It all began in 1935, when Gable, then 34 and married to his second wife, met 22-year-old actress Loretta Young on the set of The Call of the Wild. The on-screen chemistry between the rugged leading man and the devout, doe-eyed Young quickly ignited into a passionate off-screen affair. The only problem? Gable was a notorious ladies' man with a wife at home, and Loretta was an unmarried Catholic actress in an era when having a child out of wedlock could end a woman's career. Their romance had to remain strictly hush-hush. According to Hollywood lore, during a long train ride back from a location shoot, away from prying eyes, the pair's secret liaison reached its peak, and it was during this overnight journey that their child was conceived. Loretta realized weeks later that she was pregnant. It was a moment of sheer panic for her. If the public found out she was carrying Clark Gable's baby while he was still married to someone else, it would have been a career-ending scandal for both. The studio system in 1935 had strict morality clauses, and the press could be merciless. Gable's image as the charming hero would have been shattered, and Loretta's wholesome reputation destroyed. Loretta Young chose secrecy at all costs. She quietly disappeared from Hollywood until the baby was born, going to extraordinary lengths to hide her pregnancy, even from close friends. In November 1935, she gave birth in secret to a baby girl, whom she named Judy. Rather than announce the birth, Loretta placed the infant in an orphanage for a time, then ingeniously adopted her own biological daughter a year later. To the world, Loretta Young presented Judy as a child she rescued out of charity, while in reality, she was raising her own flesh and blood. It was a carefully crafted lie, aided by studio fixers and Hollywood's code of silence, to avoid the public shame of an illegitimate child. For decades, the truth remained officially unspoken. However, many Hollywood insiders suspected the real parentage. Judy had Gable's signature big ears and smile, a resemblance hard to ignore. Gable himself never publicly acknowledged Judy as his daughter. He and Loretta never married. Gable went on to marry actress Carole Lombard in 1939. And acknowledging the child would have meant scandal and breach of contract. In fact, Gable only met Judy once, briefly when she was a teenager, and neither he nor Judy knew the real truth during that encounter. Judy grew up not knowing Gable was her father, or even that Loretta was her biological mother. Only at age 31 did Judy finally confront Loretta with rumors she had heard, leading her mother to tearfully confess the truth in 1966. The full story finally emerged to the public much later. In 2000, shortly after Loretta Young's death, her authorized biography confirmed that Judy Lewis was indeed Clark Gable's daughter. It was a bombshell vindication of what had been whispered about for years. But perhaps the most shocking twist came in 2015, when a family member revealed something Loretta had disclosed in her old age. At 85 years old, Loretta asked her family what the term date rape meant. After they explained it, Loretta stunned them by saying, "That's what happened between me and Clark." In the end, Loretta Young's adopted daughter Judy lived without a father figure, while Clark Gable went to his grave in 1960, never publicly acknowledging his eldest child. Judy Lewis later wrote a book about her life, poignantly titled Uncommon Knowledge, because her true parentage was such a well-kept secret. This scandal story has a bittersweet coda. Judy forgave her mother and came to understand the impossible position Loretta was in back in 1935. And despite Clark Gable's absence from her life, Judy found closure before her passing in 2011, knowing at last who she really was. 2. A forbidden Hollywood affair with Joan Crawford. Our next scandal takes us to the early 1930s, when Clark Gable became entangled in a torrid affair with another Hollywood icon, Joan Crawford. This wasn't just any fling. It was a steamy love affair that lasted on and off for nearly 30 years, all while both stars were married to other people. In the golden age of Hollywood, Gable and Crawford were a dynamite pairing on screen, co-starring in 8 films together. Their chemistry sizzled in movies like Dance, Fools, Dance, and Possessed, both 1931. And fans adored seeing the charismatic Gable woo the sultry, strong-willed Crawford. Little did the public know, the passion wasn't just acting. It was very real, and it was unfolding behind closed doors. When their off-screen romance began around 1931, Joan Crawford was one of MGM's biggest actresses, married to the elegant Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and Clark Gable was a rising star engaged to socialite Maria Raya Langham. From the moment Joan requested Gable as her co-star, sparks flew. They were both driven, glamorous, and came from humble beginnings. Perhaps that drew them together, as each understood the other's insecurities behind the fame. Soon they embarked on a passionate affair that became an open secret in Hollywood. Co-workers noticed their undeniable attraction, and rumors spread that Gable would sneak to Crawford's dressing room whenever he could. In an era of strict morals, an adulterous affair between 2 A-list stars was beyond scandalous. It was potentially career-ending. MGM's studio boss, the legendary Louis B. Mayer, certainly thought so. Studio executives intervened as soon as they caught wind of the illicit romance. Mayer was terrified of the fallout if the press got hold of the story. An extramarital affair violated the morality clause in their contracts and could tarnish MGM's golden couple image. To quash the affair, the studio took drastic measures. Joan Crawford and her husband Fairbanks were sent on an extended second honeymoon cruise, a ploy designed to physically separate Joan from Gable and hopefully rekindle her marriage. Under intense pressure, Gable and Crawford publicly played by the rules. Joan gave interviews insisting that she and Clark were just good friends once filming ended. Behind the scenes, however, their mutual attraction didn't simply vanish. They kept the flame alive in secret. For a time, they laid low. No more risky rendezvous on the studio lot. But according to Crawford herself, they never stopped sleeping with each other, despite the outward cooling off. In fact, their affair became an on-and-off dalliance that stretched over 9 films they made together and persisted through multiple marriages on both sides. Gable married Carol Lombard in 1939, after finally divorcing Raya Langham, and Crawford went through divorces and new marriages as well. Yet somehow these 2 star-crossed lovers kept finding their way back to each other over the years. Their relationship had highs and lows, worthy of a melodrama. At one point in 1931, Joan Crawford even became pregnant and believed the baby was Gable's. At the time she was separated from Fairbanks. Faced with an impossible situation, a pregnancy that could not be publicly acknowledged, she reportedly arranged a secret abortion, then covered it up by claiming she had suffered a miscarriage after an accidental fall. Over time, Gable's love life moved on. He settled into a happy marriage with Carol Lombard, and Joan married other men. But their bond remained. In 1962, long after Gable's death, Joan Crawford candidly admitted, "Yes, Clark and I had an affair, a glorious affair, and it went on a lot longer than anybody knows." 3. The deadly hit-and-run rumor. Our final scandal story blurs the line between truth and urban legend. It's the dark rumor that haunted Clark Gable for years, the accusation that he killed a pedestrian in a drunk driving hit-and-run, and that MGM fixed the whole thing to protect him. This tale sounds like a noir thriller, complete with a cover-up by the studio's infamous fixer, Eddie Mannix. But did it actually happen? One night in 1933, Clark Gable was allegedly driving drunk down Sunset Boulevard when he struck a woman, a dancer named Tosca Roulian, as she stepped into the street. Instead of stopping to help, the story claims, Gable fled the scene, leaving the gravely injured woman behind. She later died of her injuries. With a high-profile star potentially guilty of manslaughter, MGM supposedly sprang into action to save their asset. Studio fixer Eddie Mannix, known for cleaning up stars' messes, was rumored to have orchestrated a cover-up. The conspiracy theory alleges Mannix found someone else to take the blame for the accident, and that person was none other than a young writer-director named John Huston. In exchange for a hefty bribe or to advance his career, Huston would pretend he was the driver that night, letting Gable off the hook. Huston did in fact get into a fatal car accident in September 1933 that killed Tosca Roulian. That part is true. He was sober, and the death was ruled an accident with no charges against him. But the rumor insists Houston was covering for Gable's crime, sacrificing himself to protect the King of Hollywood. It's a salacious story, the kind of old Hollywood scandal that would make headlines even today. If true, Gable would have been not just a cad, but a killer, and MGM complicit in perverting justice. However, all available evidence says this legend is false. John Huston himself, in biographies and recollections, admitted he was the driver who hit Roulian, and it haunted him for years, driving him into self-imposed exile in Europe out of guilt. A grand jury fully exonerated Huston at the time, finding that Ms. Roulian had stepped out between parked cars, and it truly was a tragic accident. There was no indication of another car or a hit-and-run scenario. In other words, Clark Gable was never involved. He wasn't even present. So how did his name get wrapped up in this? Hollywood gossip in the 1930s was like a giant game of telephone. Gable, it turns out, did have a couple of car incidents of his own, which may have been muddled together with Huston's accident over time. In 1933, around the same time as the Roulian tragedy, Gable was hospitalized for weeks, but not for a car crash. It was due to a serious gum infection that required him to have all his teeth removed, followed by a nasty bout of illness. His long absence from work angered MGM and even got him loaned out to another studio as a penalty. Years later, in 1945, Gable did crash his car into a tree to avoid a head-on collision with a reckless driver. He was banged up and hospitalized, but no one else was hurt. According to a deep investigation by Snopes, over time, Hollywood whisperers apparently conflated these separate events. Gable's months-long disappearance in 1933, which folks misremembered as him laying low after an accident, and his 1945 crash, and rolled them into one juicy but bogus narrative of a 1933 hit-and-run. It didn't help that Gable had a bit of a reputation for driving fast and enjoying his liquor, much like John Huston did. People gossiping over martinis could easily connect the dots. Hey, remember that girl who got hit on Sunset? I heard Gable was really the driver, and the studio covered it up. Once the idea took root, it became a piece of Hollywood folklore, repeated and believed by some. Even today, you'll find books and articles that mention the rumor. But credible historians and biographers have found no solid evidence that Gable killed anyone with his car.